on my right, this lovely creature.
I am Karinil Goya. I hope you would excuse my non-rising. I am the Sheriff of Roskilde in Denmark. And to my right,
Thomas Cromwell, Secretary of State, Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I'll go over here.
A few other things like that. And to my right,
Latimer Fairfield, Captain of the privateer vessel Seahawk and Baroness Sussex. To my right is my wife with booze. And on my port beam,
Old Johnny Dew, vagabond storyteller and bard.
and Lady Lee is joining us.
I'm here. I've directed everyone.
yes, you did. Excellent. Well,
Thank you so much.
Gramercy, Lady Lee.
Please. Today we're actually going to talk about the whole concept of the Celtic. We talk about Celtic spirit. We're not just talking about the idea of the Celtic spirit. We're talking about the idea, or Celtic spirit as in...
what is the essential quality that makes us Celts? And what is it that makes us different from other people? And
talking about Irish spirit.
Aye, we've talked many times about what's going on in Scotland. Yesterday we talked about what's happening in Ireland. We talk about a lot of politics, a lot of border even. What we do not often talk about is the essence of what it is to be a particular people, except for we've spoken of the English before many times in that regard. So that's going to be along those lines.
Now, the Celts are not solely linked only to Scotland or Ireland. The Celts as a people spread far and wide.
And are centuries old.
There was a time before the rise of the Roman Empire when we dominated Northern and Central Europe. The first evidence of our people that has been confirmed as that of Celtic is between the 6th and 8th centuries BC in what is now Austria, called the Hallstatt culture. But from there we spread out as far west as Ireland, as far east as Galatia in what is now Turkey, and as far south as Spain.
Many of the people who wrote histories were not friends of the Celts, and so the Celts came across as bloodthirsty, uncivilized savages.
Well, as it is said, history is written by the winners.
And the Romans wrote a lot of it, and they were no friends of ours.
Nay, the Celts fought them to bloody stalemate on many an occasion.
It was ultimately in many ways a losing battle, but we were one of the few powers in Europe to stand against the tyranny of Rome.
And more fierce.
And in fact, it is from Rome that we take our name. We do not know what we called ourselves prior to that, but the Romans called us Keltoi.
The Keltoi.
And which basically simply means outsiders, not one of us.
Now, imagine, if you will, armies. On one side, there is the very strategic military Roman army.
It's a machine.
A working machine, a killing machine. On the other side, there are these wild Celts who are untrained and unorganized.
Well,
so it seems. But they were
trained, true.
But they were fierce. Yes,
no machine, to say the least.
Intimidation has always been one of the greatest weapons of my people, and painted blue, often went into battle naked, completely and totally fearless, because we come in the ancient days of the Celts. There is a belief in reincarnation. You do not die; you go on into another life. So that is an impetus to be fearless in battle.
And why do you take your clothes off for battle?
Because if you get injured, it doesn't drive the fibers of the clothing into the wound, and you're not as prone to infection.
Yes,
exactly right.
The Celts understood what very few people have, before or since, have known, but there have been several cultures that have, which is, you are actually safest from minor injury if you are nude when you go into battle.
The ancient Celts were a warrior people, but also a people of great culture, who held in high regard people of crafts, people who wove words, who wove textiles, who created arts, jewelry,
who were learned,
and
some of their pieces, some of their work that has been found in by your time, we still do not know how they did it. How they were able to craft the things they crafted. They could do things that are beyond our understanding, not just of their technology then, but we cannot duplicate it today.
This is a culture that the best equivalent from your world that I can think of is Japan. In that it's a culture that holds craftsmanship in very high regard, that believes that you should take time to make things beautiful, and that you should also, that people who tell tales things like that are held in high regard. Aye.
Is that possibly where the Celts got their reputation for being able to perform magic?
Ah, yes, well, that's another story.
Yes, we'll talk about that in just a moment.
Our druids and bards. But, as time went on and Rome began to dominate Europe, the Celtic peoples, which were always a fractious group of tribal people, we shared at one time one language, which is often called the mother tongue. But we were always tribal, clannish, and living on our own. Your identification was with your clan or tribe before it was with anything else.
Their concept of nationhood was rather foreign to the Celts.
And as a result, even though we sacked the Oracle of Delphi, we sacked Rome before she rose into an empire, once the Roman imperial machine began rolling westward and northward, fight as we might, and despite the great valiant efforts of people like Vercingetorix, Boudica, and the various lots, we were pushed west and north.
The Celts also had a very different concept of warfare. They were amazing tacticians. They were not very good strategists. And it's because their concept of warfare is very different. Any of you who are familiar with your country's indigenous peoples, the Native Americans, it was very much the same.
Personal honor.
And the idea that a war is a single conflict and that it's done. And everything's done, it's over, we're settled, everything, and people go their own way. They didn't understand the concept of a continual warfare.
Those natives of the New World and the ancient Celts were very similar in many ways. And as Rome began to roll west and north, we were pushed to the fringes. And this continued throughout the Middle Ages. Once Rome fell, nations began to rise. It continued to happen. There are pockets of Celts throughout Europe in the 16th century. For example, on the northwestern coast of France, in Brittany. Brittany means Little Britain, and they were originally Celtic Britons from what is now England. They came to the shores of France, and they speak their own language. Also, in northwestern Spain, in Galicia and Asturias, they are probably Celts, though by our time they have lost their original Celtic language, and they speak basically a variant of Portuguese. But of course, the majority of us are in the British Isles. Wales, Ireland, Scotland, the Isle of Man, Cornwall. The fringes of the Western world. Places of great beauty, but also places that many others would not wish to live in.
Wild places, frightening places.
Wet places.
And we talk about the spirit of the Celts. So let us talk a little bit about what burns within.
Aye.
And
what drives them?
What drives them?
The fire in the head.
They believed very strongly in their connection to the world. They were amazing, we now know, and consummate astronomers. They followed the stars and the skies and the cycles, and they believed that the cycles of the seasons, the cycles that could be told from the stars, they follow both a solar and a lunar calendar, and they actually followed multiple solar calendars because there are several different kinds in which they followed. They both followed a solar year and a sidereal year. One of them has 365 days, the other has 366. They were very tied to the cycles of the seasons.
Yes.
And so we have the eight great holidays that come out of the Celtic world. Which, by the way, Constantine sort of acquired. He pulled them in.
Beltane and so on.
Yes.
All of them.
He turned them into Christian holidays so that everybody would celebrate at the same time.
Much like all the Christian holidays in your time. They all started.
Yes. But this beauty, this connection with the world, is one of the reasons why they are connected so strongly with the concept of magic. Because they had knowledge of things that other people felt were beyond the ken, that they could not, that only those who understood communing with spirits and demons could possibly know.
And predicting eclipses?
What?
Predicting eclipses?
Right, again, because they had this knowledge. they could predict an eclipse, but the fact that they could foresee the future bothered people.
Yes, they've always had a problem with that.
This deep connection was not just a celestial connection, but it was a connection, as we made mention to before, with the earth.
We are tied to the land, and the land is often spelled with a capital L among my people.
It's treated as an
entity.
We have very animistic roots. We have very strong belief, even until our time. Certain places are naturally blessed. Certain places are naturally profane and terrifying. Certain places are not for mortal men to go in, and we have that strong tie to the land. Traditionally, the High Kings of Ireland would be ritually wedded to a horse, to a mare, to basically say that they are marrying the land. They are wed to the land. And this is a concept that has influenced the English as well.
It strongly influences the English, the idea that the land and the king are one.
Are intertwined, and the king is
Cannot be
England, and England
separated.
is the king.
Not that the land only exists in relation to the king. It's the fact that they are connected together. That is one quality that all the cultures of the British Isles share.
Symbiosis.
But we know that certain places are full of supernatural events, people, beings. We know that there are hill forts where the good folk live, where you do not go.
Yes, a good example of this connection, and this is also artisanry as well. So the Romans developed back up for a moment. Throughout the history of warfare and in all cultures, there is a desire to make a better weapon. The whole idea of the arms race goes back to the first person who picked up a rock and threw it as a weapon. The Romans were considered the height of military prowess in their time.
Oh, they thought they were.
And what?
They thought they were.
They thought they were.
So they met the camp.
They thought they were among themselves. They had discovered a way to make what was considered a fairly good quality weapon, a good quality sword. And it was done in a fashion that allowed them to mass produce them reasonably so, and that they would maintain a good edge. They would not fracture. They would not break under most circumstances. They started having issues with this, of course, when the swords started getting longer. The cavalry weapons were not suited. A short sword is not suited for cavalry fighting.
You need a long reaching one.
So the Romans developed a sword they call the spada, which is a longer version of their normal short sword. The problem with this, of course, is that the longer the blade, the more flexibility it must have in combat and battle. And yet you have to also be careful, because you don't want it to bend and then come back to true.
You want it to be able to flex.
So it needs to be able to flex without staying bent. It also needs to not be too brittle, which means it won't shatter. But in order to keep and hold an edge, the steel must be very hard, which leads to brittleness. So they developed a method that was fairly good. It was the cutting, quote unquote, cutting edge of technology at the time. And then they met the Celts, and the world was completely turned upside down. The reason for this is that the Celt smiths had developed a method that even in their time they believed was secret knowledge. That it was knowledge given from the earth. They were working with things from the earth, and this knowledge was given to them from the earth, and it was very homeopathic in its
very
organic.
The secrets of the blacksmiths were as highly guarded as the secrets of the Druids.
And what they were creating is what you would know today as pattern welding. Most of you know pattern welding, you just don't know it because
it's called a different name.
It's called a different name in the world today. It is not Damascus steel. Damascus steel is something completely different, but it looks like Damascus when it is treated a certain way. And so most people today will tell you, "Oh, this is a fine Damascus blade." Well, no,
not really. It's
not really. It's pattern welded.
Yeah.
We still haven't figured out how
Damascus
to
isn't steel. That's a long way away.
Actually, Damascus steel requires not only a certain style of smithing, but a certain type of steel.
Aye.
And without it, you cannot generate it. This allowed them, but they called them snake pattern blades.
Aye.
And they would polish them very brightly so that you couldn't actually see it unless you blew across it. When you blew across it with your breath, you would see these intertwining lines that looked like snakes were running down the blade. These swords were
sharper than any.
They were an amazing weapon, and they gave rise to the idea that this was magic steel.
Aye. So this ties into our belief in the supernatural. We do not actually. That is untrue. We do not believe in the supernatural. We absolutely know it exists.
We know
because we have seen it. And our world, and the other world, as it is often called, the Welsh call it Anún or Anúven. In Ireland, it's often called Tír na nÓg or Cai Brasil. The other world lays over the top of our world. It's a spirit world, which is closely. It's like two parallel realities. And our belief has always been that that is where the good folk of the Fae live. That is where the spirits of the dead often live, and various other creatures and beings. And we know that there are times like twilight, dusk, dawn, certain times of the year like All Hallows Eve.
Intersections between two times.
Yes, places betwixt and between where the veil between the worlds is weakened and things can come through. But, as I said, we are also animistic. We believe that places, rivers, mountains, forests have personalities of their own.
We believe the animals themselves do.
Aye, and animals figure very heavily in our mythology and myths and legends.
Specifically the stag.
Aye, stags, also cranes and herons, cats, geese and swans, ravens, boars.
They're all symbols as well as aspects of different deities.
And you can see it in some of the very old names from a lot of the legends. The Welsh translation of Arthur means the divine bear. The Welsh translation of Guinevere is the white swan. That is what they mean. So they're animal names, even in the names of the Arthurian figures. But in addition to that, we are also fractious, clannish people as well. This is very strong in Scotland, where whenever war is declared against another power, such as England, the Scottish crown can rely upon some of the clans, but with some of the rest of them, they require a bit of wooing. Because often your loyalty is to your family first, above all other things. Now, there are exceptions. There are those who are loyal above all to God or to their monarch. But we have often been, for much of our history, a very provincial, clannish, local people who live on a local level with our extended families. The clans are often at war, and this isn't the case not only in Scotland but in Ireland as well. That is one of our qualities as well, and this is ultimately why Rome defeated us, was because we could not get everyone together. We had at one point far more men than they did.
And briefly, there was a united front, as you mentioned, with Vercingetorix at Alesia in Gaul. It was a huge, massive battle, multiple layered siege, and with an inordinate number of Gauls and Celts.
And if things had gone slightly differently, Rome would have been sent packing.
But they did not stay together. They would not stay together for long. They were too fractious for that.
Tis the problem.
Aye.
But another quality, as we discussed earlier, is that we are very fond of craftspeople, those who make fine things, fine items. You notice Milady here has fine jewellery upon her in the traditional style, the harp of Ireland, a brooch. These are finely wrought things that are very held in high regard in our culture. Even I wear a silver Brigade's cross somewhere on here. I get it out of my shirt.
There we go.
It's in there somewhere. I'll get it later. There it is. Even I wear this. We hold things in high regard. And also, as we discussed yesterday, our bards and the keepers of our lore. Shanachie, who are storytellers, keepers of lore and history. The bards, who are mostly associated with noble families and with the various clans. We have great respect for those people who can pass on that oral tradition and who can entertain with these stories. These are the great epics of our day for our people, and they are passed on.
And the skills that these bards have are not small skills. These are decades of learning.
It takes a very long. It took me 17 years to learn all of the tales.
And indeed, it is important that the bards are very disciplined in learning these things, because for them, as we discussed yesterday, not only do they not write things down, they are forbidden from writing things down, because of the belief that it is that is the oral traditions that keep things alive.
The only things we write down, or that we would write down, would be the sort of things that Master Cromwell writes down about figures and numbers and
important things.
Wow.
Well,
as it were.
We do business that way.
Business things, exactly.
Indeed.
But the stories, the cultural touchstones and touch points are
These
far too important.
Yeah, we consider them far too
To
important.
put them at
Now,
risk.
that being said, when Rome came through and destroyed our way of life and brought down the Druidic religion and all of those things, there are stories and tales and whatnot that only survive because they were written down by monks during the early parts of the Middle Ages. And I'm thankful for that, because otherwise we would have lost that entirely. That's the downside of an oral tradition, as we discussed yesterday.
Indeed. I do want to say that one of the things that is most misunderstood about Catholic Ireland is the idea that the Catholics came in and were all wondrous and nice, and that St. Patrick chased out all the snakes and all of
everybody
these
lived
things.
happily ever after.
It was actually quite a brutal way of looking at things.
One of the old Irish names for Patrick is the Vile Spirit, and it's that touch up to that old Druidic way that's.
But the entire reason he was sent was because the early Christian church, when it came to Ireland, found sort of a kindred spirit in many of the peoples there, and sort of melded into, because it was of a little different bent than what we now think of as Christianity.
It was called the Celtic Church,
and it became the Celtic Christian concept was very different from the standard Roman Catholic concept.
And it took in many ways the best of both worlds, of Christian and pagan, and put them together.
And it was accepted.
This is one of the reasons why we do have these stories written down by the monks.
Thank goodness for
because these monks looked at those stories with respect.
Aye.
The first ones that came looked at the culture around them with a great amount of respect and wanted to preserve it and felt it was worthy of keeping. And quite honestly, I think they knew what was coming.
Indeed. And some of them have a very Christian bias in them, understandable. But some of them were recorded pretty much exactly as they were in the old days. Thank goodness for those monks, because otherwise much would have been lost. There is one other thing that we have that is very strong current through our culture. We feel emotions very, very keenly as a people. We are a very passionate groups of people.
Well on your sleeves.
Yeah, the Welsh, the Irish, the Scots, the whole lot of us are like that, and we celebrate.
And not shyly.
We have a great passion and joy for life, and life is meant for living. We love feasting and all that sort of thing, but when we feel sorrow, it is extraordinarily deep as well.
I also want to say that one of the things that the English take very strongly from the Celts, which actually, and this is true in Ireland as well, but not in Scotland, is the equality of women. Much of that in England comes from the Celtic spirit, because in the Celtic world, the sexes were considered different and separate,
but one was not superior to the
yeah,
other.
there was a matriarchal bent to the culture, and also women were sometimes warriors.
Yeah.
Ireland now is very matriarchal. Like my wife.
You see that in Ireland very strongly. You see that in many ways, at least in the cultural system of England. You do not see that too much in Scotland, which has actually taken a great deal of influence from the French and from the continent.
You would see it more in the Highlands of Scotland.
Indeed, the Highlands are more close to the Celtic norm than they are in the Midlands and the Lowlands.
And finally, hospitality is an incredibly important tradition of our people. This is another influence that we've had on the English as well. And if you're a traveller in the far north, in the Highlands of Scotland, or the mountains of North Wales, or Ireland, and it is raining like this, someone is going to put you up for the night. For them not to do so would be a terrible breach of tradition, especially because you have no idea who that person might be.
There are tales of the kings of Ireland or Scotland wandering around, and spirits as well, or fae taking on human
guise. It could be one of the old gods, it could be anyone, yes.
And also, once someone has given you hospitality, aren't you technically a member of their family until sunset the next day?
Exactly, so they are to treat you well. And there are many stories of people giving bad hospitality and being horribly punished because it was a lord, or it was a queen of the Sidhe, or it was something along those lines.
It is something that the Celts hold very strongly to, that you should invite everyone in, and once they are in, they are family.
Aye.
And terrible, terrible things happen to people who kill guests, or guests who kill their host.
Oh, that's one of the worst things you can do.
That's right up there with regicide.
It is.
It is a
that
horrible
little
thing.
war between Wales and Ireland once, but that's a tale for another time.
We're at time now.
My lords and ladies, we are out of time. I appreciate your patience for
Look at you.
coming and sitting underneath our awning and standing up through this. And once again, you make our lives wonderful simply by being here. So thank you very much. This afternoon we are speaking of the haunted isle.
Haunted Isle.
We're going to talk about the ghost stories that come with being in Britain.
And it is likely to be gloomy and misty.
Quite appropriate for
Yes.
And
If
luckily
you can
enough, you're
stand
sitting in
it.
one of the villages which have a lot of ghosts.
We have a lot of
Scarborough's very
interesting things that happen.
almost as much as your place.
So
Thank you all.
if you're still here and still